She's cheating on us. At my kitchen table sat a rather somber group of people. My three wives, Amber, Kathy, and Heather, and their two husbands, Mark and Jeff. The only one missing was our second wife, Claire. She was also my legal wife. If that sounds complicated, that's because it was. Polyamory wasn't as iffy as it used to be, but we were still very careful. Careers could be ruined, family relationships strained or broken because they couldn't or wouldn't understand. That's why we were so careful. And if one of us got involved with someone outside the group, it could destroy the infrastructure to the point of total breakdown. We had rules. One of the main ones was that if you wanted to bring someone else into the group, they had to be thoroughly vetted and the rest of us had to make sure they were a good fit. And you absolutely, under no circumstances, were you to do anything with anyone outside the group. All sorts of considerations had to be taken into account, one of the main ones being the health of the group. Since we all slept with each other in one combination or another, if one got infected with something, sooner or later, everyone got infected. Our marriage didn't start out that way. Claire and I were married for about a year before she started talking about the polyamorous lifestyle. She would leave articles at her house, and one day I came home and saw a copy of The Ethical Whore on the coffee table. I read it. The woman spoke intelligently and lucidly about the merits of this lifestyle. Then Mark, Heather, Jeff, and Katie started to come around. Not that Claire insisted on it, but she hinted rather insistently. Nevertheless, it took almost 2 years before they wore me down. I went along with it, promising Claire that any time I said stop, it would be over, and we would go back to monogamy. Jeff and Mark were bi, as were Katie and Claire. Amber and Heather were straight, as was I, although I think Heather was considering it. Amber lived with us, Kathy lived with Jeff, and Mark lived with Heather. It was all mostly for appearances. The partners in bed changed every week. Sometimes it was Amber in my bed, sometimes Heather, occasionally Kathy, and of course my wife Claire. Now, I highly doubted she could come back. In some respects, it was a very good thing. If you needed something done, you knew who to call. Amber and I loved being outdoors and made sure to get out to camp at least 3 times a year. She also loved kayaking and fishing. We introduced Mark to fishing, but he decided he liked fly fishing better, while Amber and I caught whatever we could get our hands on. He and Mark even hunted, but that was enough for me as a youngster. I still loved going to the range to shoot skeet and targets, though. Amber wouldn't stop talking about skeet shooting, and most of the others tried it too. Now it was Amber, Mark, Heather, and me. They even bought their own guns, 2 over-ander 28 gauge for the ladies, my 1100 pom-pom, and Mark bought a very snazzy double-barreled 20 gauge with rabbit ear hammers. Rabbit ear hammers. The guns were stored at my house. Heather was the most urbane. She knew where the trendy restaurants were, where the latest gallery opened, and generally anything that was trendy at that second. If you wanted to spend the evening in a black suit, Heather was your girl. Jeff loved woodworking and exhibiting. I think his business card at Lowe's was decorated with a gold ribbon. I had the largest house and lot thanks to my late grandmother, and I gave him the use of one shed for tool and hobby storage. This man had a lot of tools. I helped him from time to time if I needed to lift a heavy load. He built my dining room set, a bedroom set for the guest room in my house, and a huge closet for Amber. I tried several times to talk him into going into business, but he wasn't sure he could make a living and didn't want to do it. My wife wasn't an adventurous person unless it involved the tropics and a 5-star resort. Then she was totally fine with it. Last year, we went on vacation as a group to one of these resorts where clothing was not required and had a great time. There were a few unpleasant moments, too. Claire got a little tipsy and flirted with a stranger so much that he was sure she was going to spend the night in his hotel room. He was a little annoyed when the group swooped in and drove her back to the villa. She was hungover and apologized. I hadn't spoken to her in a while, and the other ladies were giving her hell. "You almost ruined everything last night, girl. It took you 2 years to talk your husband into it, and you almost ruined it. If you want weird, find it. But if you do, and we find out, you're out. No second chances. And as angry as we are, you better think about your husband. He'll dump you in a minute, and the band will be gone. So we're interested in your behavior. Don't spoil a good thing." She must have seen the writing on the wall and stayed exclusively with me for the rest of the trip. She apologized, I clarified my position, and we seemed to put it behind us. Now it seems we haven't. The guy wanted to object, but Mark is 6 foot 3 inches, a gym junkie, and Jeff has muscles like a hobbit. I doubt either of them had ever fought anyone in their lives. I, on the other hand, was a wild child who knew that when you fight, the only rule is to win. My height was 170 centimeters, and I wasn't fat. He didn't seem to be paying attention, but he recognized something about me and backed off. I carried Claire into the room and threw her on the bed. After a few minutes, she passed out. I barely spoke to her the whole next day, and the girls hounded her for getting drunk and doing something stupid. She never apologized to me, but tried to show me she was remorseful. I don't think she had more than 2 drinks at a time for the rest of the vacation. And now Heather thought she was cheating. How sure are you? She looked at me sadly. Not 100%, but very close. She disappeared for a couple bachelorette parties. Then she started skipping work, taking long lunches here, leaving a couple hours early there. I checked and she wasn't with any of us. Did you notice anything? Not really, but then again, she's not here with any of us that often or for that long, so it could have been pretty easy for her. Jeff asked what I wanted to do. Remember the last time she pulled that shit? She didn't go all the way and party, but that was because we found out about it early enough. I think I'll call my friends who do surveillance. I'll tell you what, if she's having fun with someone on the side, I'll leave her, which means I'll leave the band. You were her friends long before she was with me, and I don't want to ruin that dynamic. Besides, this lifestyle is starting to bore me. In any case, I would have left a long time ago. That shocked and silenced them. They had been urging me to try it for a long time now, and I personally thought I was a fool for agreeing. I was desperately afraid of losing her and thought that if we experimented a bit, she would get bored of it and it would be just the two of us again. I wanted to start a family, and she wasn't keen on the idea. Maybe it was time to call it quits. Don't do anything rash, Jake. We don't know anything yet. Her physical infidelity is of little consequence. Why haven't either of you had children yet? There was an awkward silence before Heather spoke. We made a pact. Neither of us were going to have children until we were 30. That made it easy. I want each of you to look me in the eye and tell me why it wasn't brought up when you tried to talk me into it. Did any of you ask me what I thought about waiting at least 4 more years before starting a family? The silence dragged on before Jeff began. We were afraid it would prevent you from accepting our lifestyle. Besides, Claire told us she finally told you, and you were fine with it. Once again, Claire lied to the group. A strange thought crossed my mind, so I decided to ask. Tell me something. When you girls decided it was time to have kids, were you going to have them with your spouse, or did you just get lucky? There was a very long, very awkward silence that did me no good. Finally, Heather spoke up. We girls discussed it and decided that the first child would be with our husbands. Then we thought we could share to bring us closer together. They all kind of froze in anticipation of an explosion, and I didn't disappoint them. Screw you! Screw you! Get out, now! Heather and Katie were already halfway to the door. Mark pretended to want to say something, but hesitated. I always liked Jeff better, and he thought I'd be nicer to him. Jake, calm down. I didn't realize you didn't agree with the plan. I don't think Mark was okay with it, and I know he wasn't okay with it, but from the looks on their faces, the girls knew. We'll leave now and come back when you've calmed down. Yeah, I don't think so. Don't come over. Don't call me. If I want to, I'll call you. I'll be staying at my house this weekend, alone. Tell Claire to go ahead. I know she has to be with Mark this week. When she hauls her ass in, let her know the situation has changed. If she comes back to me, she comes back to me. No one else. Make sure she understands. And make sure she understands that it's not written in stone. A few sighs sounded. It didn't seem to have gone at all the way they'd planned. I was ready to give up that lifestyle as it was. Everyone has to live according to their moral compass, and mine was pointing less and less toward the life I was living. Amber didn't leave, but tried to stay out of my sight. I grabbed a couple ciders, walked back to the bench under the walnut tree, and sat down. I was still there when it got dark, and Amber opened the kitchen door, lighting up the backyard. Jake, are you still in there? I made dinner, honey. Please come in and eat. Amber was the youngest. She was 22, while most were 28 or 29. She was just as cute as the rest of them, but she didn't finish high school in the best way. In fact, she didn't finish high school at all. When I found this out, I gave her no choice and put her in an adult school. I didn't want her to have a high school diploma. I felt it was important for her to get a real education. I coached and mentored her, and the rest of the group helped her. She became valedictorian of her class and thanked me by name in her speech. Her diploma hung in a frame that Jeff had made for her out of cherry wood. I decided I was hungry, so we ate in silence. When I finished, I thanked her for the food and asked her one question. "You're the only one who isn't married in our group. Where did you enter the paternity lottery?" She lowered her eyes for a second and then gave me the look of innocence I loved so much about her. "I was only going to have one child. Yours." I knew that no matter what happened, whether the group stayed together or not, whether you and Claire stayed together, you would never abandon your child, or her mother. "Why me?" "Because you're the best of us, Jake. You're the one who takes care of everyone. All the other girls told me when we had our bachelorette party that after the first child with their husbands, you'd be the next. You know that if I sleep with any of them again, it will only be under protection, right?" A tear trickled down her cheek. "That's what I thought. Let me tell you this. If you and I end up in the same bed again, you don't have to worry. I will never try to lure you into a trap like that. Never. Do you understand?" Well, while we're on the subject of truthful confessions, I think you're the best of us. You never say a bad word about anyone. And even though you're the youngest, you're the mother of the group. That tells me that when you have a child, he or she will never have to worry about being taken care of by a mother. You'll be a saber-tooth among kittens when it comes to your children. She smiled for the first time, but then turned serious. If you're the father figure and I'm the mother figure, we have to decide what to do with these unruly children. I smiled back. Personally, I'm in favor of kicking them out of the nest and seeing if they can fly on their own. I'm serious about getting rid of the group. I'm tired of having everything I need and nothing. I don't think this lifestyle suits me anymore. Good night, Amber. I left her at the table as a tear rolled down her cheek. Around midnight, I felt her slide into my bed. "This may be the last time I share this bed with you, darling. Why don't you just hold me for a while?" She fell asleep snuggled against me, and I lay there wishing I had met her first. Then I smiled. When Claire and I got married, she was 16 years old. I woke up to someone making noise in the kitchen. Amber was still in my arms, so it could only be one person. It was her week with Mark. Why would she be here? I knew the answer as soon as I asked myself that question. She was here to deal with the aftermath. I wondered what she would think when she discovered I was gone. I got dressed, walked down the back stairs of the old farmhouse as quietly as possible, opened the door, and quietly walked out. Old houses required a lot of maintenance, and I never could stand creaky doors, so I was constantly oiling and maintaining them. I took my motorcycle, an old Triumph that Mark had helped me restore, and rode it down the long driveway, starting it up as I pulled out onto the highway. After driving around some more, I decided to go boating and maybe do a little fishing. We all bought a big pontoon boat together. Lugging it back and forth wasn't very practical, so we rented a spot at a local marina. I filled the tanks, checked the fishing gear to make sure nothing was needed, bought fresh bait, restocked the fridge, and set sail. I was going to head to the headwaters of the lake. There were never many people there, which surprised me because the fishing was really good there. We usually held fish until we had enough for a fry. But even though they were biting, this day I decided to catch and release. I stayed on the water until noon and then headed back out, and the first person I saw when I got back to the dock was Claire. She was smiling, but looked scared as she tried to hug me. "Don't." "What?" "Don't touch me right now." "But you're my husband. I'm supposed to touch you." The laugh was short and bitter. "Me? Really? Or am I just another buddy in your string of buddies with privileges? I'm really tired of this lifestyle and I need to think about it. In the meantime, the best thing you can do is give me enough space to make a decision. Please." Yes, it worked. Instead of giving me space, she piled her whole body on top of me. Crying and pleading didn't seem to help, and I just stood there with my arms at my sides until she finally stopped. When she finally backed off, she uttered the classic phrase, "We need to talk." "About what? How much entertainment do you need to feel fulfilled? Obviously, you're not getting enough at home, or with Jeff, or with Mark. Wait, maybe it's the girl you slept with. That never occurred to me, but it's entirely possible." She sighed. I'd never talked to her so bluntly and cared so little about her feelings. Besides, she was starting to get nervous. There were people around. "Please, Jake, let's go home and talk. I'll explain everything when we get there. I surprised her with my agreement and got on my bike, but instead of turning right and following her, I turned left and unhooked my bike. When she turned around, I was already out of sight and could have turned onto any road, so she went home to wait. I rode for 2 hours and ended up in front of my great-uncle's house. He was already in his 70s, but he was still quite witty and always gave sound advice. He came to the door, smiled when he saw me, invited me in, grabbed a couple of beers and went out onto the back terrace. We talked for a while about general topics, and then I confessed that I was having marriage problems. I didn't initiate him into our lifestyle, but I told him I thought she was cheating on me. He thought for a moment. You need to find out. If that's the case, try to find out if it was a random act or a planned action. That will help sort things out. Sometimes people make bad decisions in a fit of emotion and then regret what they did. And sometimes people make deliberate decisions and take risks. You need to find out if there was an affair, if it is still going on, and if the cheater feels remorse when you confront them. The trick is to find out if he regrets having an affair or if he's just sorry he got caught. When did you get so smart? He grinned. With age comes wisdom. That and years of experience. I'm glad you're old enough to realize that. We sat in silence for a few more minutes before he spoke again. You know, before I married your Aunt Clara, I was married to someone else. She was seducing 2 different men when I caught her and kicked her to the curb. Not because I didn't love her, but because what she was doing was pre-planned. Everything was planned. I was single for 4 years before I met Clara. I thought the sun and moon rose and set because of her. And then she cheated. That shook me. Clara was the most loving and honest woman I'd ever met. He continued. I suppose, given my history, you're wondering why we stayed together? It was a drunken, one-time mistake. One day, when I wasn't home, she went to a bar with her sister for a drink. Her sister stayed. They continued drinking, and she ended up in the backseat of some jerk's car. I can't imagine the pain she had to go through to tell me about it, but she did. She left and went back to her mother's house. We were separated for 5 months before we got back together. Like I said, it was one time she was drunk and told me as soon as I got home. It was hard for a while, but she never drank another drop of alcohol. She never spoke to her sister again. I think it was her hobby to take her friends on dates and get them to the point where they were in the backseat of someone's car. About a month after this incident, 3 women jumped her and beat her to a pulp. When she recovered, she was no longer as beautiful as she had been. After she recovered, she left and no one knows where she ended up. I thanked him for the beer and conversation and headed home. Next chapter. I wasn't too surprised to see all the cars in the driveway. She must have put out the everyone pack up alarm. I wasn't in the mood, and then I realized I never would be and decided now was as good a time as any. The only one who made eye contact with me was Amber. She smiled sadly at me and made coffee. Heather decided to start. Jake, we can stop here. The fact that you're here emphasizes the root of my problem. This was supposed to be a serious conversation between me and my wife, not me. Her and all her cronies. There was a collective sigh. Kathy looked indignant. There's no need to be so rude, you know. We're not just buddies, we're more than that. We're companions, lovers. We help each other. That's the whole point. You help each other. No one exists only for their mate. Face it. You all do this because you're afraid of being alone. You have no solid footing. You're just bouncing from one thing to another. I sighed. I know I have no right to judge you. After all, I was one of you. But I made a decision on the way here, and I realized that it was a decision I'd been coming to for a long time. I'm not happy, and I won't be happy until it's just me and one other person. Someone who can't run to someone else if I get on her nerves. I guess that's the part of a relationship, getting on each other's nerves, but you know you have to stay and deal with it. You can't say that. I looked at Claire. Claire, how many nights have you spent in our bed this month? Enough. Enough for who? Not for me. You've been home, or in what should be your home, 8 days this month, and today is the 27th. Even if you spend the rest of the month with me, it's only 11. 11 out of 30, that's not marriage. Not for me, anyway. But we had a commitment. First of all, we had commitments to each other. Do you remember them? Maybe the fact that you're standing in front of your friends and family with me and the preacher will serve as a wake-up call. We've discussed this before. This type of marriage is obsolete. It won't be years before marriages like ours become mainstream and no one will judge them. Perhaps it will, but even if it becomes mainstream, it still comes down to choice. What happens if couples refuse this lifestyle? Will you force them to? You all know that will never happen. Maybe sometime in the future when dinosaurs like me become extinct. I suspect that will happen very, very soon. Heather voiced her opinion. We all love each other, Jake. I love you, just as I love Mark and Jeff. It makes us stronger. Ever heard the expression divide and conquer? That's exactly what we do, sharing time with other people and overcoming all the obstacles couples face. Have you ever thought, how I wish I could be in my bed with my spouse tonight, as you lay with your lovers? Despite all the fanciful descriptions, that's exactly what we are. We are lovers. But deep down, we don't love each other. At least not in my understanding of love. Protests immediately followed. I just let them babble on until they ran out of steam. When they fell silent, I changed direction. Mark, Jeff, this is for you. If your wives came to you right now, today, and said they were tired and wanted to be exclusive again, could you do it? I ask because you're a little different from me. Kathy, how about you? Would you be able to sleep exclusively with your husband and not dream of a woman's touch, knowing they would be rejected by you for the rest of your life? The silence dragged on until Mark finally spoke. But we don't need that. I'm happy with the way things are. Everyone gets what they want and everyone is happy. Heather looked like she was deep in thought. It seemed I was shedding light on something she hadn't thought about before. I turned to Amber. Where are you at in all of this? I'm just a +1. I don't have my own dog in this fight. I got here because I was lonely and misunderstood, and you guys befriended me. I've been thinking about leaving for months now. I'd like to find a man who only wants me, maybe have kids. My clock isn't ticking, but I think motherhood would do me good. I think I was the only one who wasn't surprised. Amber was young, but she wasn't an idiot. None of this would have happened if your wife knew how to keep her legs shut. Heather was right. I looked at Claire. She looked a little pale. How so, honey? Have you been recruiting? If you lie and I find out, we'll never be husband and wife again. If you hope to stay with me, you'd better tell the truth. She hesitated for a moment. It was nonsense. A silly affair that I thought would do no harm to anyone. I will put an end to that affair. You had 3 men and 1 woman and you still went on a quest? How many men do you need? It was Mark who spoke and he looked very angry. You've exposed us all. What happens if you catch something nasty and you have to tell the medical staff about everyone you've slept with? It's a small town, and one of the reasons we're cautious when we go out as a group. We can explain away anything anyone sees by the fact that it's just a bunch of old friends having a good time. If we showed up en masse for testing, how long do you think it would be before someone started showing interest? You've really messed this up. Needless to say, you need to stay home until we're sure we're not in any danger. Heather was a little pissed off as well. Why did you do it, Claire? We've been attached to each other for years and now that's threatened. If the band breaks up, I'm taking this to your doorstep. Everyone fell silent and I gave them a few minutes to gather their thoughts. Claire, you were right when you said this was the end of the affair. Not in what you've done now, but in general. It's been one big drawn-out affair. I like all of you, but I'm leaving. From now on, I will only sleep with my wife, and if she can't do the same, we'll split up. Please don't make this any harder than it has to be, guys. I'm not judging your lifestyle, and I still want to be your friend. It's going to be up to you. It's just not for me anymore. There was nothing more to say. Everyone had left, even Amber, and she made it clear that she wanted to spend the night alone. Claire just sat there for a minute. Can you do that? She snapped out of her self-contemplative state and looked at me. Do what? Be monogamous. One partner for the rest of your life, no exceptions. I don't want to, can't we? We can't. When we started down this path, I knew deep down that this is how it would end. But I tried because I genuinely loved you. But even with as many partners as you have, it wasn't enough. Oh, I'm sure you'll try and maybe you'll last a while longer, but the temptation will be too strong, and you'll go back to your old habits. And just so you know, I'm not judging others, but I am judging you. You don't have one right bone in your body. I have a feeling you've been playing with us since before we even joined the band. Let's save ourselves the hassle and just announce that it's over. She could hardly understand what I was saying. For a minute, I thought she was hyperventilating, but she got her breathing under control. Claire spent the rest of the evening trying to talk me down, but by bedtime she realized I'd had enough. We didn't sleep together that night. She slept in Amber's room. I lay there trying to figure out how my life had gotten to this point until I fell asleep from exhaustion. The next morning, she was already up and making breakfast, and I was helping her. Old habits are hard to give up, and that comforted me in a way. We ate almost in silence, and then she said she had something to do and left right away. I found out later that she was reaching out to everyone, looking for support. Obviously, she didn't get it. I wasn't too surprised when I came home the next day and saw that her things were gone. There was a note on the kitchen table. "You were right. We are too far apart to be together again. I'm sorry things turned out this way. I thought we had the perfect life. I talked to the band yesterday and they all agreed that if you're leaving, I'm leaving. They're still mad about me leaving the band, and even though they didn't say it outright, they don't trust me anymore. I've taken exactly half of the money from our accounts. I have no desire to cheat you out of anything. Except our marriage," I thought. "And I know the house belonged to you before we were married, so it's yours. I'd ask you to let me take some of the furniture when I rent, as well as some memorabilia that I don't have room for today. I'll always love you. Who knows, maybe someday, huh? I won't count on it, but it's a nice fantasy. Claire?" The group arrived on Wednesday. They had called ahead to make arrangements. They were still my friends, and none of this trouble was their doing, except for the obvious ones, so I accepted them. We talked for a while, and each expressed their regrets. Jeff said he'd bring the tools back by the weekend. Why? Anyway, you're welcome to come anytime, all of you, just as friends for no profit. I think that put them at ease. We ended up cooking a meal together, and Amber sat down at the table with me. "Can I go home now?" "Yes, you can. But we won't sleep together. I'm still in the process." I thought so, but I want to be in my own bed. If you need me, call me, even if it's just to snuggle. She stayed another 4 months and we had nothing. Oddly enough, I felt like I'd be cheating if I slept with someone before I was completely divorced. Amber found a nice apartment and decided she would be happy there. Jeff and Mark came over to help her move her bedroom. Her only regret was having to part with the dresser that Jeff had made for her. It was too big to fit in the apartment. I made her promise that as soon as she found a bigger apartment or got married or even lived with someone, we would make sure she got it. 5 months later, I got my divorce certificate. Everything was very civilized. No yelling, no drama, no fights over property. Just sign here, 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 sign here. Congratulations, you're divorced. The group sent it, of course, and I wondered what she was doing. But then I remembered how beautiful she was and how she was goofing around even before the divorce, so I doubt she lacked male companionship. Or female companionship, for that matter. Mark and Kathy divorced a year later for reasons unknown, at least to me. One day I asked Jeff if he'd found someone else to be in a relationship, or if they were now alone in forced monogamy. He grinned. "It's not as small a town as you think. Heather and I are seeing 2 couples right now, and another has expressed interest in our lifestyle. We're proceeding very slowly and cautiously, but things are looking promising." Well, good for them. Everyone deserves happiness and fulfillment whatever path they choose. When Mark left, Jeff and I bought out his share of the boat. He and I had a fishing trip planned one morning, and he called to see if he could take a couple friends along. I knew they were part of his new group and didn't mind. Bill and Fred were good guys, but couldn't fish worth a damn. I took Bill and Jeff took Fred. We gave them the Fishing 101 textbook, and by noon, they were ready to go. Jeff told them a little about my history, and they took the hint. But I told them I had left that lifestyle behind, and besides, I didn't have a partner. The way Fred looked at me, I knew he was willing to make an exception. They became fishing buddies and then came to the farm, if you could call the 15 acres that remained of the original property a farm. I was inclined to think it was a very large lawn with a few trees. My cousins owned about 60 acres or so behind the farm and lived out of state, so I pretty much owned the place. I owned the barn, but not the pasture behind it, but I could use it if I wanted to. I never wanted to until Fred begged me to let him put his horses there, agreeing to pay the rent. He had 4 of them, and I thought it would be a good idea to keep the pastures under grazing so they wouldn't turn into brush. I told him he could do it, and I wouldn't charge him any money, but I wouldn't take care of them. Fred arrived with 2 horse trailers and a flatbed full of hay. He brought his family with him, and together they all got busy stacking feed and setting up the horses. The rest of their group arrived as well, and I got to know everyone. Besides Jeff and Kathy, Fred and Bill's wives were there, as well as another couple who had joined them about 4 months ago. They turned out to be nice people, and we got along quite well. The ladies went to the local supermarket, and I fired up the brick barbecue that my grandfather had built 60 years ago, especially for such occasions. There was alcohol, but they didn't drink much, and as the day drew to a close, we all hung around doing nothing. Fred's wife, Sarah, happened to be next to me, and after a little conversation, asked if I knew Claire Wilson. I was married to a woman named Claire, but it only lasted 6 years. As far as I know, she moved away. Did you know why? Not really. I didn't even know she'd moved until someone told me about it. If it's the same person, and I think it is, would you want to know why she moved? Not if it would make me depressed. I hope she's doing well, even though we've gone our separate ways. After all, there was no hate there. At least on my end, we just reached a fork in the road and she went left and I went right. After you, she remarried, and she and her new husband were part of a group I was part of. They didn't last a year before they disappeared. They weren't like us. Things got out of hand when they gave us a little gift, if you know what I mean. It wasn't particularly nasty and was easily cured with a couple drinks, but because we were worried, we voted them out. They didn't take it well. After that, the band broke up. A few months later, we met Jeff and Kathy, and they brought Bill and Martha. We've been together now for 18 months. Stan and Chloe are our newcomers. Tell me, do you ever get bored? Believe it or not, I get bored sometimes. But for the most part, it's been great. The feeling of being part of a close-knit group of people who you know have your back. You guys seem to have that, and I'm happy for you. It's just not for me anymore. She grinned. Well, if you ever change your mind, I have a sister. You'll be the first person I call. As they left that night, she gave me some more information. I have to tell you something else about Claire. I wasn't sure until I found out what kind of guy you seem to be. Claire and her husband joined the same group, a big group. Things got out of hand when a new woman showed up without her husband. He wasn't happy when he caught her and burned the group to the ground. He had pictures and recordings that he posted on the internet. There were some pretty powerful people in the band, and when they were exposed, it cost the couple their careers. Claire's new husband was the one who brought her into the group, and they became very uncomfortable. The pressure became so intense that they divorced. You should know that Claire has come home. I have spoken to her and she is in intensive therapy, private and group sessions. Her condition seems to be improving. Just thought you should know in case you see her. I thought about it as they left. Claire was obsessed with wanting to have fun. I checked her out and the profile matched. I don't know if she can be cured, but I wish her the best. Next chapter. Amber came to me with the same news. We kept in touch, and one day she called me wanting to ask me an important question. Would I walk her down the aisle? She looked amazing in her dress. Her husband seemed like a nice guy and was completely devoted to her. They had a baby girl shortly after their wedding, and she was a sweet and obedient child. One day they came over so she could show him her closet and see if it would fit in her house. We measured it, and from the way he talked, I doubted it would fit. The baby saw the horses and fussed, so I carried her downstairs, and when they huddled together at the fence, she clung to me very tightly. I think when she realized they weren't going to eat her, she relaxed and rubbed her nose against theirs and giggled. I took her out to the pasture and put her on the back of Molly, an old mare with the kindest disposition I've ever seen in an animal. I made her walk a few steps while she giggled. When we got outside, Amber tried her best to frown. Now all I'm going to hear is that she wants a horse. Well, I have plenty of pasture. Her husband Bob laughed and said, They'll come back to me in 8 or 10 years. When little Belle went to bed, she told me about meeting Claire. I hardly recognized her, Jake. She must have gained 30 pounds and it didn't look good on her. I invited her into the house and we had coffee while she played with Belle. You know, if we'd stuck to the plan, I'd be almost as old now, she said. She asked if I kept in touch with everyone, and I said I saw Jeff and Kathy from time to time. I had no idea where Mark and Heather were. She asked if I see you, and I said we are still close, that you walked me down the aisle and were the godfather of my child. When I told her that you were doing well and that she should come visit you, tears came to her eyes. She wasn't sure if she would be accepted. I don't know if she was fishing or not, but I told her she should call you and gave her your new number. Have you heard from her? No, but she has no reason to be afraid. I don't hate her, though I hate what she's become. But that's water under the bridge now. I have no intention of having relations with her again, but I can tolerate her in society. If you see her again, tell her to come see me. Be sure to give her my words. I don't want her to come with expectations. 3 weeks later, they returned, and Claire was with them. Amber turned out to be right, although before they arrived, she told me she had lost a little weight and smiled more. But she still had a lot of wrinkles around her eyes. I carried Belle into the barn, and she awed when she saw the little pony. Amber didn't know whether to smirk or complain. I wasn't looking for a pony, if that's what you're thinking. Jeff had a friend who was moving out of state and had to get rid of his horses. He called me to see if he could bring them here and give him a chance to find a place to put them. He had moved to New York City, and after learning that it cost almost as much to keep a horse as it did to rent an apartment, he asked Fred to find them a good home. A white mare and a gray gelding are a new addition. Do you want a horse? Claire petted the white mare, and I saw her first smile since she'd been here. Amber and Bob carried Belle into the house and left us alone. Why haven't you gotten married yet? Haven't found anyone I want to marry yet. What about you? I heard you and your new husband split up. I'm sorry to hear that. Have you dated anyone since you moved? No, I think I'll stay away from relationships for a while until I come to my senses. I know Amber told you that I've been seeing a counselor and that I've been getting help. It's weird that a woman who wanted to have fun with almost everyone is now celibate. I stay away from bars and compromising situations because I know how easy it would be to snap back. The excitement of meeting someone new is as strong as an alcoholic craves a drink. She was silent for a second, and when we came to our senses, she asked me the question I knew I had to ask. Jake, do you think we could spend time together again? Just so you know, if we do, you won't get anything, at least not for a while. I waited a minute. It's not a good idea, Claire. There's too much baggage. I don't think we can overcome the ghosts of the past, and I don't see a good ending. A small tear rolled down her cheek, but she smiled. I thought so too, but I had to ask. One more thing. Since you seem to have extra horses, can I come and ride sometimes? I rode the trails when we moved, and I really liked it. Take the white mare. She's well-trained and has a good temperament. I lay in my empty bed that night and thought about it, remembering the time we had spent together. Next chapter. She surprised me by coming over the next week. I didn't even realize she had arrived until I saw her car outside the barn. She drove around for about an hour and then drove off. A couple weeks later, if I wasn't busy, I would saddle Gray up and ride with her. When Gray first arrived, he was skittish. Jeff said his friend had only had him a short time and he was very poorly trained. I read books, watched training videos on YouTube, and made him my project. I made mistakes, but learned from them, and pretty soon we became buddies. He still wouldn't let anyone ride him, so most people left him alone. We talked more during those rides than we had during our entire marriage. We never became lovers again, but we became very good friends. One day she went on a date with another woman. She was a little older than me and kept a low profile. But when she saw us socializing, she relaxed. Her name was Polly, and a month after we met, she came to see me alone. I want to talk to you about something. Claire and I have started to have feelings for each other. Do you think it might be leading somewhere? I think you're asking her, not me. I know she likes you a lot. Do you know her history? Most of it. She says she's changed. The question is, do you think she's changed? And are you willing to take a chance and find out? I think so, and I'm willing to put enough into myself to find out. Believe it or not, that's not why I came here. How many booths do you have available? Can I rent one? I know we can ride yours, and you gave Claire's mare away, but I need my own. If you agree, will you help me find one? I thought for a moment. My house and lot 75 years ago were part of a huge dairy farm, and my barn was just huge. A local historian came to see me once and said it was the biggest in the county. An empty stall shouldn't have been a problem. No, but only because I'm not the expert you need. Let me introduce you to my buddy, Jeff. I called Jeff and explained the situation. He didn't know whether to laugh or lose his temper. Let me get this straight. You want me to find your ex-wife's lover a horse that she can keep in your barn so they can come over and ride? You're a tough dude, bro. Count me in. Jeff and Kathy met Polly and found common ground. Pretty soon, they became part of our group, but only socially. Everyone would almost always gather at my house on Saturday mornings to clean the stalls and ride a little, then go home. Amber and Bob would come by now and then, and the ladies would drool over Bella. It must have triggered their nesting instincts because 6 months later, Katie and Holly got pregnant. I was dating a woman I really liked, and she would sometimes come over to our house when they were there. We didn't say anything to her about group dynamics, but she didn't seem to like anyone, especially Claire and Amber. What bothered me was that the horses didn't like her, including Molly, and everyone liked this old lady. We lasted about 4 months, after which we decided our life goals didn't align and went our separate ways. By then, Bella was 4 years old and had her own saddle. I absolutely refused to let her get on the saddle unless she wore the helmet I had given her, as well as a neck protector. Bob had his eye on one of those equestrian airbags, but couldn't find one small enough. We let her ride with us if we were going slow, and one of us always had a rope for emergencies. She almost always fell asleep in front of someone halfway through the ride, usually me. If it wasn't me, it was Polly, which really surprised her. Right now on the nightstand next to their bed is a picture of Bella, Claire, and Polly cuddled up in a hammock. The kid has enough aunts and uncles to make a team for almost any sport. Fast forward 12 years. I sat in the grandstand with my wife and watched our child compete in equestrian events. In fact, they were all her favorites. The only thing I didn't like was the jumping, especially in the steeplechase. She was 17, but she had inherited her mother's short stature, and the thought of tons of horseflesh ripping around her while jumping scared the hell out of me. When she finished the competition, she came out to the bleachers to cheer on her 11-year-old sister. She hugged Amber and then jumped into my lap and gave me a big kiss. I think I performed really well, Daddy. I think so too, Belle. Let's hope the judges think so too. So how did it happen? About a year after everyone started riding, Amber came to me and said she thought Bob was acting a little strange. She couldn't figure out what was wrong. I tried to assure her that it was nothing, but I promised I would talk to him. She left and I went down to the barn. I had gotten into the habit of checking on them at night after a stray dog had followed them. He died prematurely from a 12-gauge muzzle, but I still kept my guard up. Did you ever feel like you were being watched? The wool on the back of my neck stood up, and my own dog, a Pyrenean that I'd taken in to watch the horses, looked tense. I went back into the house, grabbed my shotgun, went out the front door and slipped out of the barn. Halfway down the driveway, I came across two cars and recognized them immediately. My blood pressure rose, and I decided to just wait by their cars. 30 minutes later, they came down the driveway giggling and holding hands. They kissed hard by their cars and were about to drive off in different directions when I spoke up from the darkness. "Bob, Haley, great night, huh?" Haley shouted. She was Lester's wife, the latest addition to their group. I felt like they were getting too bulky, but it was none of my business. Each new addition increased the chances of them getting cracked. Jeff's wife was a school teacher and Bill's wife was a nurse, and they really couldn't let their private affairs become public. Lester was a police officer, a shift sergeant in the state police. He was on an upward trajectory, and something like this could ruin his career. Haley started babbling something and Bob stopped talking. I let her babble for a while longer before I stopped her. "You do realize that you guys are on the verge of ruining a lot of lives, right? If this gets out, the whole group is in danger. Bob, you're an asshole. Amber doesn't deserve this. How could you do this to her? It's her own fault. I tried for almost a year to get her to join the group. She said she's been there and done that before and doesn't want to do it again. Even if she doesn't need the experience, I do. She's just being selfish. You're full of shit, you can rest assured. Are you willing to risk your family for this? Trust me, when Amber finds out about this, she'll dump your ass in a second. Is that really what you want? Maybe we should break up. I'm ready to expand my horizons, and if she's not with us, I'll find someone else." I slapped his ass. He didn't notice in the dark, and I punched him right in the jaw. He dropped like a stone. Haley screamed again. "Maybe we shouldn't make so much noise. Someone might come over and see what's going on." There wouldn't be anyone. I was at the end of a long driveway, and I had no neighbors, but she didn't know that. That silenced her immediately. "Go home, Haley. Go home and think about what you've done. It's bad enough in a normal marriage, but in your case, it's much worse. You betrayed not only your husband, but 4 people today. What do you think Lester will do if he finds out? If I even suspect you're doing it again, I'll destroy your world. Do you understand?" That's it, nothing more. Say it. Not anymore, Jake, I promise. Your promises don't carry much weight right now. One more thing. Was that the first time? Don't lie. She admitted it was the fifth time. 3 of them in the barn. Then, as she left, she sprinkled gravel on Bob. As for Bob, I left him to lie. Let him tell Amber some story about how he'd been wronged. Maybe she'll see right through him. I meant what I told her all those years ago. She was the best of us. I was glad at least one of us had found our happiness, and now it was proving to be a lie. The next day, Amber called me with bad news. Bob had been mugged outside the sports bar where he was watching the game. He'd been doing that a lot lately, saying he knew how much she hated baseball and didn't mean to hurt her. There was a big screen TV in his man cave, but Amber let him go, figuring it was good for him to see his friends once in a while. How badly is he hurt? Do the police have any suspects? He didn't call the police. When he came to, they were gone, and he had no idea what they looked like. Something must have spooked them because they didn't even take his wallet. He got a bunch of scratches and a swollen jaw. I told him he has to watch the next game at home. Sounds like a good plan. Keep an eye on him just in case. He could have a concussion or something. I tried to talk him into going to the hospital, but you know how stubborn he is. I know. Maybe this will be a wake-up call for him. What does that mean? It means he needs to prioritize. What happens to you and Belle if he gets killed? He won't be killed. Besides, we have you. You'll take care of us. I will take care, and you know it. Let's not let that happen. Give him my words. He has a lot to live for. Thank you, Jake. Love you. I love you too, baby. I'll see you soon. I pondered this, and everyone noticed it. The only time I truly smiled was when Belle was climbing all over me. Katie put what everyone was thinking into words. Jesus, Jake, you act like someone ran over your dog. What the hell is wrong with you? Never mind. You have a date on Saturday. She's my cousin, and she doesn't know about our lifestyle. She just moved here and will be staying with us until she finds a place to live. Ask her out, buy her wine and dinner. Maybe you'll get lucky. If you ask her out, I know we will. See if you can talk her into staying. She grinned. Don't think it's a sacrifice, the girl's hot. I had nothing else to do, so I asked her out and had a surprisingly good time. She stayed the night, and we went out a few more times until we realized there was no spark. Amber took great offense to me. Why can't you find a nice girl? I kissed her. I found one, but she's married to someone else. She grinned and jabbed a finger at me. That ship has sailed. You had your chance. It took me a long time to get over you. We're going to keep looking, aren't we, Bob? He didn't look me in the eye as he answered. You got it, kid. The sooner we get him married, the sooner I can stop worrying about you two. She giggled, but if looks could kill, she'd be a widow in no time. It was bound to happen. Nature, karma, stupidity, they all probably played a part. They slipped back into the barn because they knew I had a date and spent 2 hours together. They got dressed, made themselves as presentable as possible, and left. She slipped out first, and he waited 10 minutes and, grinning, got in the car. As he pulled onto the road, he began to ponder if he could seduce his secretary. The signals were coming in, and he was happy to take them. Bob was figuring out how hard it would be to talk his secretary into having some fun, and he already knew that Haley was willing to do it. Police lights came on behind him, and he pulled off the road like a good citizen, wondering what made them stop him. Maybe his taillight had burned out. He thought it was odd that they ordered him to stick his hands out of the car, but he did. A policeman came over and pointed a flashlight in Bob's face. Could you shine the light in my eyes? I can't see. Certainly, sir. His eyes, still blinded by the flashlight beam, didn't see the stun gun. The exertion made him lose control of his bladder. Humiliation was the least of his worries as he was dragged out of the car and began to be beaten with the aspid, a curved piece of very flexible metal covered in leather. Bob could hear his bones crunching as the man worked him over professionally, knowing where to strike to cause maximum pain. Finally, he was pulled by his hair and nearly passed out from shock, oblivious to the pain. Sergeant Lester lowered his face to Bob's face and in a very controlled voice told him how bad his choices had been lately. The man laughed as he let go of Bob's head and it bounced to the sidewalk. Then a gun flashed in his hand which hit him right in the balls, fracturing one of them. He immediately lost consciousness. He didn't know how long he lay there. The road was impassable, especially at night, But finally, someone showed up. A local sheriff's deputy took one look at him and called an ambulance. The ambulance driver was shocked by what he saw. He had been to Afghanistan and seen with his own eyes how prisoners were interrogated there, so he realized that this man had been worked over by a professional. His left arm was broken and two fingers on his right hand were shattered. His right elbow was shattered. His left leg was broken, as was his right ankle. Whoever did this knew how to deliver pain. Strangely, whoever had done this hadn't touched his face. The one eye was swollen shut and a glove imprint was left on his face. When they saw the blood between his legs and cut his pants open, he nearly lost his dinner. This guy wouldn't be frolicking for long, if at all. He was taken to the hospital where they worked on him for 3 hours. He had lost one testicle and a finger, but everything else was patched up. They also discovered an injury they hadn't noticed in the field because of his fur. Someone had kicked him in the head. Hard. They put him in a coma until the swelling in his brain goes down, but they're not sure if the damage is permanent. They, I.D. quote, D him from his wallet. Damn, the cop thought, going through the wallet and looking at the pictures of a pretty young woman and a little girl. He hoped the guy had good insurance. As dawn broke, the cops surveyed the scene, but there wasn't much to see. The only tire tracks on the side of the road belonged to the victim's car. With no evidence, the case was quickly hushed up, and when the man regained consciousness 40 days later, he said he didn't remember anything. The detective in charge of the investigation could have easily realized he was lying, but refused to change the story. It smelled of something personal to the detective. Maybe he was entertaining the wrong wife and she had a husband who took it seriously. Maybe he was doing something he shouldn't have been doing. That morning, Amber called me in a panic, crying uncontrollably and mumbling incoherently. I immediately stormed out of work and drove to the hospital. When I saw the condition Bob was in, I felt sick to my stomach. Eventually, it turned out that no one knew why he had been attacked, and when he finally woke up, he said he didn't remember anything. He had good insurance, and Amber made sure to pay it off every week to keep it active. Her finances were strained to the breaking point, so I evicted them from the apartment they were living in and took her and Belle home. I noticed that everyone in our social circle, except Haley, came around and offered to help. One day I asked Jeff where she was, and he looked at me like he was weighing what he wanted to tell me. They're not here anymore. Lester got a promotion and they went to the other side of the state. That told me everything I wanted to know. It took him almost a year to recover enough to work again. When they got back on their feet and found an apartment, Belle didn't want to leave. We all had to reassure her. I went back to my life, still not attached to her. The group went quiet for a while, but gradually returned to good spirits. One day I asked Kathy if they were going to audition someone else for the band, and she was wary. We're going to keep the band where it is. It'll be safer that way. The only bright spot in this dismal time was Claire and Polly's wedding. I walked them down the aisle and wondered if it would all work out. I hoped so because they looked happy. They had a plan. They were going to find a baby to adopt in 3 years. They seemed to be looking forward to it and were constantly borrowing Belle to practice parenting. Amber came back to me 3 months later. Apparently Haley was back in town and laid it all out for her when she first saw Amber. Amber slapped her hard enough to knock her down and went to deal with Bob at work. That day quickly turned into a very lousy day because she stormed into his office and caught Bob and his secretary there. Everyone on the floor heard yelling and screaming and several people went to deal with her. One of them was the vice president and Bob's day got a lot worse. Amber grabbed Belle and ran to me. I got them back to their old rooms. Bob's day was getting worse and worse. The vice president was going to fire them both, but the secretary reported predatory behavior that made her practically bulletproof, so Bob left and she stayed. He tried to apologize to Amber, but she wasn't in the mood for forgiveness. He finally snapped and said that if she would just go back to the way she was when we were together, there wouldn't be a problem. He gave her an ultimatum: find a group to join or he would dump her. She laughed so hard she almost cried. How can you leave me? I've already left you in the dust, figuratively speaking. Good luck finding someone to take you on. Most groups have their own underground where they report important things. By the end of the week, there won't be a group left in the state that hasn't heard of you. Besides, you usually need a partner to join a group and you don't have one. I'm filing a statement of irreconcilable differences. Don't be a jerk. Sign the papers. He threatened to make a fuss, but Jeff's quiet words on behalf of the group calmed him down. The divorce went through, but that didn't stop him from acting like a jerk. It got to the point where he tried to grab Belle and run away. I happened to catch him first. Let her go, kid. Stick to your visitation. If you run away with her, it'll violate the custody order. And when you get caught, you're going to jail. I still have Sergeant Lester's phone number. If I call him and tell him where you'll be doing your time, he can give you a decent reception and a pleasant stay. The wind had gone out of his sails and he just sat there crying, and Belle threw herself into my arms. She loved him, but the beatings and the direction his life had taken had changed him, and she could feel it. He left town without leaving an address. I tracked him down before the wedding, offering to release him from child support if he gave up his parental rights. He tried to detain me, and I grinned. If you can't pay the arrears, you'll probably spend some time in jail, and the payments will only go up. I can probably get a judge to revoke your license if you end up behind bars for any length of time. Agreed. He agreed. I tried to hate him for what he'd done to his family, but all I felt was sadness for all of them. So what brought us to the altar? It started with Belle. She was having nightmares, running into my room and climbing into bed. I'd just take her in my arms and fall asleep. The first time Amber saw us, she smiled, and by about the fourth, she decided she deserved to be touched too. They ended up in my bed about 4 nights out of 7. Nothing happened between us. She was still mourning her marriage, and I had no such feelings at the time. It took about 5 months before they calmed down enough to sleep in their cribs all night. I was self-employed and could set my own schedule, whereas Amber's was very rigid. I often had to make sure Belle got to school on time, make her breakfast, and pick her up after lunch. If something happened and I couldn't, one of our friends would do it, most often Claire or Polly, but usually both. It didn't work very well because they held her hostage until almost bedtime. Eventually, we had to make rules and stick to them. I didn't realize I had been promoted until she went outside with her little friend to get him. It was warm, and I rolled down the windows to listen. I heard the girls talking. "Which one is your daddy?" She pointed to my SUV. "That one over there." I defiantly got out of the car, helped her into the seat, gave her a hug and a kiss on the cheek. She giggled but hugged me back. I told Amber about what she said later that evening when she had already gone to bed. She only smiled and patted my arm. Next chapter. Belle could be very serious, and one day she came to me while I was in the barn. I knew Amber was watching her from the house. I lived in a quiet neighborhood, but I'd read enough horror stories to be on the lookout. She climbed up on the stall wall and watched me check the wound the white mare had made somewhere. I'd put an antibiotic on it, and if it didn't improve by tomorrow, I'd have the vet come to me. "Is she okay?" "I think so, baby. I just did to her what I did to you when you got scratched. Put some medicine on it and put a Band-Aid on it." I didn't know it, but Amber had gone down to the barn and we couldn't see her, but she could hear everything we said. "Do you really like Mom?" "I really like your mom. Very much." "Can I ask you something?" She looked as serious as possible for a 7-year-old. "Go ahead, baby. I want to call you Daddy. My friends say you already are. If that's true, why can't I call you Daddy?" Well, it sure was dusty in here. That's probably why my eyes were starting to water. "You can call me Daddy if you want, sweetie. I'd love to be your daddy. But being daddy is so much more than just being called that. It means I have to love and protect you until you grow up. I can handle that, but it requires that you love me back." Her face lit up with one of those beaming smiles I love so much. "Silly Daddy, I already love you. Does that mean you have to love Mommy too?" "Absolutely. Moms and dads who have sweet girls should love each other. It's the law. But I won't love her because I have to. I'll love her because I want to, for the rest of our lives." At that moment, we heard a sob and turned around. Amber was on her knees, tears streaming down her cheeks. Belle rushed to her, scared to death. "Mommy, are you okay?" When her voice came back to her, she said that she wasn't just fine, she was very happy. "Why are you crying since you're happy?" "It's grown-up girls, honey. You'll figure it out someday. Don't you want to spend the night with Aunt Claire and Aunt Polly?" "Yes, why?" "So Mommy can do big girl things with Daddy, okay?" "Okay." On the way back, after we dropped Belle off, she went ring shopping. We went to 5 different stores, from big chains to a few small independents, before she found what she wanted. Fate must have been with us because the ring was the right size and she wore it right out of the store. I asked her to marry me in the barn. Not the most romantic place, but I still got down on the floor next to her and proposed, with Belle as our only witness. Belle told Polly and Claire what had happened, and they smoked their telephone pipes. By 7, the party was in full swing. Jeff was working the grill with me and grinned. What? Nothing. I'm happy for you. I've got some good news, too. Katie's pregnant, 3 months pregnant. That's good. Learn all you can, and in a couple years you'll be able to guide me. That started a trend, and over the next 4 months, 2 more ladies became pregnant. They all agreed and only slept with their husbands until they were sure they were having a baby. Jeff also told me that no woman should have children that are not her husband's. They all agreed. The first child was not theirs because Claire and Polly had adopted a 4-week-old boy. They were certified within 18 months, which they said was pretty quick for this system. They told the boys that we had to teach them how to fish, ride, and everything else a little boy should know. Amber decided I was getting old and didn't waste any time throwing out birth control the same day I gave her the ring. She must have been in good physical shape because another girl, Jessica, was born, followed 2 years later by a boy, Jake Jr. Besides Claire and the band, we had many other friends, but we rarely socialized. 20 years later, we were at the barn watching my daughter Belle introduce her son to the horses. He was giggling and reaching for them, just like her, so I think he'll be fine. We got on the horse and I ended up next to Jeff, with a small gap between us and the other riders. We shared memories and general topics, and I asked him if he thought he would have his lifestyle when he was in his 70s. Absolutely. There hasn't been a new couple in our group in 16 years, and I think we'll be together until the day we die. Change is coming, Jake. People are already becoming more relaxed. I suspect that in another 20 years it will be quite common and marriages with multiple partners will be legal. You really think so? Think about it. I thought about it as we drove and indulged in the memories. If Claire hadn't cheated on me outside the group, would I have stayed in it? No, I would have left eventually. When Claire said it was the end of her affair, it sparked something in me. However you explain it, I felt like I was in one long drawn-out affair, fooling myself more than others and not having the life I wanted. So I ended the affair and lived my life, and I regret nothing. The end. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for the next videos.